Could someone with zero coding skills build a machine learning model from scratch? Well, that's exactly what we're going to try to find out today. A few months ago, I took a beginner machine learning course which taught me the framework of building machine learning models. And in this video, I wanted to build a model that actually predicted Airbnb prices in New York. And to be fair, throughout that course, I did end up building a couple different machine learning models using Python. But in this video, I didn't want to code anything myself. So in this video, we're going to use exclusively ChatGPT to code our machine learning model, obviously with my instructions in the background. So if you're non-technical like me, in this video, my goal is to help you build your first machine learning model from scratch by watching it and replicating it in your Google Colab environment. My name is Matt Paiva. I build AI solutions for businesses, especially on the sales and marketing side of things. And I use no-code solutions like Make.com, Zapier, and Relevance AI. So let's get started. So we're going to start off in Google Colab. So you just need to type Google Colab in your browser and this will pop up over here. And Google Colab is just a software that Google created that allows you to write Python code and run that Python code in your browser, so you don't need to install anything in your computer. And I feel like this is a very easy way to get started with these types of machine learning models. In fact, it was the way that our professor instructed us to do that during our course. So once you open your Google Colab, there should be nothing there to begin with. So you should click on Start a New Notebook, and this will pop up this page over here. And here, just for reference, you can like rename your file. So you can call this first ML model over here, just for the sake of organization. And here you can close the release notes. Oh, one other thing is that there is this functionality here, the generate functionality in Google Colab, where you can write anything in plain text and it will translate it into Python code. So you can pretty much code without actually coding, like using an LLM model in the background. But I'm going to use ChatGPT for our purposes. So that's why we have ChatGPT open over here. And just for organization, I'm going to move our Google Colab over here to the side as well. But before we start coding anything, why don't we take a look at our data set first? So this is the data set that we're going to be using over here. And as you guys can see, we have quite a lot of rows. In fact, we have over 43,000 rows over here, and each row corresponds to a specific listing in New York. And it was collected in 2019. So here we can see, we're going to run this in Python as well, but we can see that we have a few different columns that outline a few different things. So the property ID, the name of that Airbnb, the host ID, the host name, the neighborhood group, the location in latitude and longitude, the room type, the price, minimum number of nights, the number of reviews, last review, reviews per month, the calculated host listings, pretty much how many listings that host has, and the availability in a given year. So there's a lot of predictors that we can use over here, but I just wanted to show this data set in Excel, which is a platform that most people are familiar with before we moved on to our Google Colab environment. Okay, so we're going to start us off by writing a quick prompt here in ChatGPT, giving it a little bit of context. And first, I will say that I want you to help me write a machine learning model step by step. I have a data set I gave you, and I will use Google Colab for this build. Please ask any clarifying questions as we go. And can you start us off by connecting my Google Colab to my Google Drive? I also provided my data set over here so we can understand what are the fields that we have. And I wrote the name of each one of the columns over here with a little bit of a description in each one of the name of the columns down here as well. Now let's see what it will give us in the beginning. And for context, I am using the GPT or actually the O4 Mini High model, because this model is a little bit better at coding, and it is the one that OpenAI recommends when you are coding anything. And since I'm not technical, I want to use the best model available to code this, so it minimizes the potential errors that we could get while coding this using ChatGPT. So it gave us this code over here, and you can just copy this over here, and we'll see that it says from Google Colab import drive, and we can click on this button over here to run it. And we will see that once we click on that, it took me a couple of seconds, but it's asking to connect to my Google Drive. So here we're just going to click on this button and connect our account. So here I'm connecting my account, and this will pretty much get access to my Google Drive. And once we see the small little check mark over here, we know that that job has been completed successfully. So we're going to go back. If there are any errors, it will let us know. So not to worry about it as of right now. Okay, that's awesome. So next thing that our GPT is asking us to do is to give the exact path for our file. And to get this exact path, we need to click over here on this little folder icon. And in the folder icon, we're going to see that our drive is connected. And in our drive, we can just look for the file that we're going to use, which is this one, Airbnb New York City 1 2019, obviously. Here we click on the three buttons and click on copy path. If you are using your Google Drive, just make sure to create a folder for this because it makes it so much easier for you to find that file when you're looking for it on that list. And just paste the file path over here into your GPT. Here is my file path. Now here, once I pasted the file path, I'm actually going to include some more information because I want to import a bunch of things in the very first step. And I just know that I need to import this because I've done this before. This was actually my final exam for that course. So I know exactly the things that I need to import, but I'm also asking it to import pandas and numpy, which are, I think it's pronounced numpy, I'm not exactly sure, which are things that we're going to need eventually in this build. I'm also importing a bunch of other things that we will use later down the line. Also, guys, don't worry, this entire chat from ChatGPT, including the Google Colab notebook and the files that I'm using, are all going to be available for free in the link down in the description below. So if you want to follow along, or if you want to download this and change anything as you go, feel free to get all of those resources by clicking on the first link down in the description below. I feel like that's the best way to give you guys a lot of detailed information in the video, but you guys can also go and double check it itself, double check the code itself to see exactly what we're doing in each step over here. So as you guys can see, ChatGPT has provided us with a little bit of code, and I can see that the first line of code is actually what we just imported over here. So I'm not going to copy that, and I'm going to copy everything else. Now, I know that pretty much what we're doing is that we'll see these like hashtag in the description of what we're doing. So we are downloading the libraries that we're going to use. We are downloading these other imports over here that I know that we're going to use later down the line. We're going to get into each one of these concepts later down the line, I promise. And we're also loading our Airbnb data and checking the headers of that Airbnb data. So once we paste this over here, we just need to click on run. And you can also click on run by clicking Command Enter over here. That will work. And we will see that we got an output over here. And I'll actually make this full screen so it's a little bit easier for us to see. We can see the name of each one of the columns and the first couple of rows on each one of the columns. So how I started this process off when I was doing this for my final exam was I ran some descriptive analysis on this data set. And what does that mean? I actually just want to understand what these data points are and how they are distributed. Because if we have a data point that's really skewed to a specific side, we will actually skew the prediction of our machine learning model. So here, I'm going to tell ChatGPT to give me the code to get the descriptive statistics of each column and also to see if we have any missing values. And this is a really important step because we're going to try to predict the prices for these Airbnbs. And if our data set is skewed in a specific direction, meaning, for example, that most of our listings are located in Brooklyn, our machine learning model won't be able to accurately predict the listings that are in Manhattan, for example, because all the data it was trained on was from Brooklyn. So that's exactly why we're trying to understand these descriptive statistics per column to see if we have any specific outliers. Okay, so back to our computer. I am now in dark mode because it is 9 p.m. We are going to copy this piece of information over here from our GPT step. We have an optional step that gives us the percentage of missing values, but I'm just going to ignore that for now. And we're going to paste that information right over here and run it. Okay, so after we run that code, we'll see that we have these two really big tables down over here. The first table is pretty much giving us the descriptive statistics of each one of the columns, and I am genuinely interested in the last 4 columns of this table over here because it outlines the minimum value of a specific variable and the maximum value of that variable, and that will pretty much, and I'm going to compare that value to the mean, which is just the average of that value. So this will pretty much allow us to figure out if there are any outliers just by looking at it. So I'm going to ignore the first couple of rows, like the ID, the name, the host ID, and the host name, because these could have like literally any different values and they are not numerical values. But I can see right off the bat that our average price for an Airbnb in New York is $152 over here. And the maximum price that we have is literally $10,000 per night. So we know for sure that the distribution that we have on our price variable is really, really big, and it probably has a really long tail. At least that's what they call it in statistics, meaning that you have a bunch of listings that are pulling and skewing the whole information to the right or to the higher end of the spectrum. Okay, so I told ChatGPT that I wanted a box plot for the variable price because a box plot will allow us to pretty much see the distribution of these variables. or pretty much of this variable specifically. So I'm going to go ahead, copy this code over here and paste it in our next code block. And then I'm going to run this. We can see that our box plot, like we can't even see a box plot over here. We can just see all of the outliers over here. And for reference, this is what a box plot should look like. I'm even going to leave this part over here. And as you guys can see on this comparison on the screen, the one that we have on the right is what a box plot usually looks like. So we have usually this little box which outlines the quartile 1, the median, and the quartile 3. So this is like between 25 and 75% of all of the data points that we have are going to be within this range. And this is exactly what we have when it comes to our variable over here. We can see that like everything is compiled in this small box plot, quote unquote box plot. And that all of these other dots that we have over here represent outliers, as we can see on this part over here on my right side of my screen. These are all representing outliers. As you can see, they go all the way up to $10,000 per night. So obviously we need to fix that, and we're going to ask ChatGPT how we should go about it. So I said I have many outliers in the price variable. What should I do with it? So ChatGPT is suggesting a couple different things, and I'm going to take a couple of these things and actually use it. The first one that it suggests us to do is to log our transformation. And pretty much whenever we log a variable, it means that we're trying to address any non-linearity that exists in that variable. So in simple terms, if we have many outliers, we're going to pretty much do the log of the price. So if our price is $100 per night, now we're going to have a second variable that's called log of price, which is going to be log of 100. Another thing that ChatGPT is suggesting us to do is to remove extreme values, and this is called trimming. And it's asking us to take a look at the 1%, the top 1% of listings, and pretty much remove all of those from our listing. And last but not least, it's suggesting us to cap the variable as well. So instead of dropping the extreme values, we would cap them at a specific cutoff point. Now, I could actually use any one of these three. I think I did on the final exam. I logged the variable and I capped it as well, which was pretty interesting. But if we log the variable, we're going to have some interpretation problems later down the line whenever we're interpreting the error, because instead of interpreting the error in terms of dollars, now we're interpreting in terms of log of dollars. So I think for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of doing something a little bit different, I want to cap our variable. So here I'm going to paste our cap, but instead of doing the second line of this piece of code over here, I'm actually going to ask it to print this over here. So we can see that the 99th percentile of price is above $799 per night, or $799 per accommodation, because we have different minimum number of nights over here. And this means that the top 1% of our data set is above $799. What we're going to do with the rest of that 1% is that we're going to cap that value. Okay, so I asked ChatGPT to interpret the meaning of capping, and essentially it's letting us know that for every value above the 1% cutoff, so above $799, it will now become $799. So here we'll see that all of these outliers are going to become $799, which will pretty much reduce the influence that that variable has in the rest of our system. It also means that our model won't be good at predicting the price of extremely luxury Airbnb listings, but that is just the top 1% of listings on Airbnb anyways, at least in New York, so we shouldn't be too worried about that. I'll go ahead and I'll paste the code that we had from before, and now we're going to move on to our next step, that I can see that we have a bunch of missing values. And we're actually going to deal with the missing values next. So here I'm going to paste this table over here, and I'll say we have some missing values. Here we can do a couple different things. We can remove it. We can pretty much replace it with the mean. But given that the missing values that we have are last review and review per month, I think that what ChatGPT is going to recommend us to do is to pretty much replace those values with 0. So we'll see if that's what it says for us to do. Okay, so we got to a point where our GPT started hallucinating, and I actually fully expected this to happen because it's telling us that 54% of our reviews per month don't have a value, which is pretty much translating it from this 9,000 value over here. But in reality, that corresponds to about 20% of our values, which is really interesting because when I did this first, it wasn't this much. It was not like 9,000 values that did not have that were missing values on these two rows or on these two columns. So I'll kind of just run with it for it right now, and I will fix ChatGPT's mistake. So I gave the information that I got when I ran the code itself on Google Colab, and now I am asking it to pretty much give me the code again, because I'm pretty sure there are not 9,000 values that are missing in this data set. So I'll just go ahead and I'll just copy all of this code, paste it over here, and run it. Well, okay, it's actually identifying all of the 9,000 values. That's okay, we'll run with it. Okay, so now I'm instructing ChatGPT to reason what we should do with the missing values in reviews and reviews per month. We know that we have some missing values in name and ID, I think. Host name, yeah, the host name and the name of the property itself, but those are very little and they're not going to be predictors in our model. So here I'm just asking what ChatGPT would do, and it is suggesting us to pretty much replace those values with a 0. Okay, so our next step will be to drop our variable of last review to create new variables over here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to fill the missing values that we had, those 9,000 values, with a 0, because that means that the last value didn't exist. So there wasn't a last review. Then we're going to change the last review variable to a days since variable. So instead of having a date field, we will have a how many days since that last variable was updated, or how many days since that last review was updated. For our missing values that we will have with that, we will just use the maximum amount and add a +1. And then we also have an optional step to add a binary indicator, which will essentially be 0s and 1 if the listing has a review or does not have a review. Now, why are we doing it like this instead of dropping all the data? Because that corresponds to about 20% of our data set that does not have a review. So we could either choose not to use that variable, or we could manipulate it like this, how we're doing it, to actually go ahead and do that. So I just pasted the code over here into our Google Colab, and I'm going to run it once, see what comes up. And there we go. We have our new variables, and it seems like it worked how it was supposed to. So now that we've adapted our data set by removing the outliers, or essentially capping our price variable, and then also doing some manipulation on the other data relating to the reviews, we can move forward to select the variables that we want to use to predict price. So here I'm going to ask ChatGPT, what variables should we use in our model to predict price? There we go. So it does provide us what values we are going to use. We are going to remove these ones: ID, name, host ID, host name, and last review, because we already encoded this. And we are going to have to change a couple of things before we move forward. I see that it is already telling us to go ahead, but we need to do some dummy encoding of our previous categorical variables before. And let me break down what that means. Essentially, we have names. We have strings of text over here when we see neighborhood group and neighborhood. And this could be, for example, Brooklyn, and it could be Manhattan, and it could be the Bronx, and everything like that. And then in neighborhood, we could have Soho, for example, or somewhere more specific. I'm not too familiar with the sub-neighborhoods of Manhattan, but essentially we would go and need to change those variables into 0s and 1s. And what I mean by creating 0s and 1s is exactly this that we are looking on the right side of the screen over here. As you guys can see on the original column, we had a color variable over here that had green, red, black, orange, and other colors. And then we apply this one-hot encoding to pretty much create a single column for each specific row. So the first column over here, which is green, will have a 1 on green and 0 on everything else. And that's pretty much how it's going to work for everything else. So that's exactly what we're going to do for those variables, neighborhood and neighborhood type, or I should say neighborhood group instead of neighborhood type. And I see it's asking us to select the variables X and Y first before we do the one-hot encoding, but I'm going to swap that out. I'm going to say, can we do the one-hot encoding first, please? And I know that Sam Altman said that please and thank you is costing them millions of dollars, but it's good practice to be polite. There we go. So this is the code that we're going to need, and I see how it's doing. It's pretty much creating the categorical variables over here: neighborhood group, neighborhood and room type, and then the numerical features, which we have latitude, longitude, minimum nights, number of reviews, etc. We're going to go ahead and copy all of this, come back to our code, and paste that code over here. Oh, and we ran with an error. Let's understand why we got that error. I'm going to pretty much copy this, paste it back over here. This is actually the first error that we get in the whole video. So this is good to know what to do if you get any of these. And before I actually paste this into ChatGPT, I'm just going to say I got an error on this code, and I'm going to paste that. We'll see the error was on the 13th line by using this one-hot encoder. I guess we might not have imported that yet, so that could be something. So I'm gonna paste this, and actually I don't know exactly how it will solve, but I will give a suggestion. I will ask can you solve using get dummies from Panda. I think that's the name of the function if I'm not mistaken, but we will see what the suggestion from the O4 mini high model will be. Okay, so we're gonna copy this, and I'm actually gonna go back to our code and replace this code over here. And pretty much what we're doing differently is that we're using this different function that we have already imported, and that does look like it worked. So this is what's happening in the background. We are using the dummy encoding, pretty much true or false, zeros and ones. And we created a bunch of variables that are related to each one of those groups, right? So pretty much we have all of the neighborhood groups over here. So we have neighborhood group Bronx, neighborhood group Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and so on and so forth. Okay, so last but not least, I'm going to ask GPT how do we move on, and I'm pretty sure it's going to suggest us to create a train test split in our data. And there we go. Our GPT model is asking us to create a train test split. Well, first of all, what is a train test split and how are we going to use it? Why do we need to use it? First of all, a train test split is pretty much getting that entire data set and splitting it into a training data set and a testing data set. And usually this is a proportion like an 80-20%. So 80% of the data set is used to train the data set and 20% is used to test the data set. And why we do this is pretty much to test our model with new unseen data. So if we pretty much train our model in our whole data set, our error will pretty much be 0 because our model will overfit. Now, without any complicated words, that just means that our model is memorizing every single row in our data set. So if we have a specific listing, it will just look for that specific listing on the data set and come up with the exact answer that we need. And that's not what we want, because we want this model to be good with new unseen data. That's why we're going to create a training data set and a testing data set. And then we're going to test the model on the data set that we didn't touch when we were training it to see what type of errors we're getting. Well, in this scenario, it wouldn't necessarily be what type of errors, but more necessarily the amount of the error. How big is that error? To create our train test split, we're going to copy this code over here. And I'm pretty sure we've already imported all of this from the beginning, but that's okay. And here we are going to define the variables that we're going to use. We're going to use price as our predicted variable, meaning that we're going to use all of the other variables to predict price. Okay, so we're going to copy this and paste it over here. And I see one of the changes that I think we're going to need to make is that we first define X and Y, and here under Y we are defining it as price, and I'm pretty sure we're going to use price capped because that price capped is not skewed or not like crazily skewed. So we're going to keep it over there. We're determining that our train test split will be an 80-20, and we're going to create a model using a random forest regressor, which is a type of machine learning model really commonly used. Okay, so when we run this should actually fulfill our goal of writing a machine learning model without writing a single line of code. But I do want to test out the mean absolute error in the model that we create, and then pretty much create some hyperparameter tuning, which is just evaluating what kind of combination of parameters will give us the best outcome. And once this code block finishes running, we're actually going to have achieved our goal of created a machine learning model, and that's pretty much it. But then we're going to evaluate our mean absolute error, which essentially is like what is the amount of error that we get with this type of model, and we're going to try to compare it with something else, or at least to tune it so we are getting the minimum error possible. I'm not sure here if tuning is the right word, but yeah, we would be doing what is called a hyperparameter tuning. Okay, so it looks like our model ran, and our baseline MAE, meaning that our baseline error is $51.96, meaning that whenever we predict the price of an Airbnb, we're going to be off by on average $51.96 whenever we do that, either up or down. So before we do any hyperparameter tuning, why don't we compare this to a simpler model? So I'm going to instruct ChatGPT to compare this model to a simpler model. and evaluate the MAEs. We're going to compare this model that we created, which is a random forest regressor model, to a linear regression model. And a linear regression, if you have done any like statistics in the past, you will know that it's pretty much a linear line where we're trying to match the values. So I pasted a code over here to compare our random forest regressor model against a linear regression model. And we can see that the linear regression model, it has an MAE a little bit higher, an MAE of 57.54 in comparison to our previous one, which was 51.96. And just to give a little bit of clarity on what an MAE is, because I know I haven't explained it before, MAE stands for mean absolute error, or the average absolute error of a model. Now, we measure that by looking at a graph that kind of looks like these ones. So for example, over here, we have a line for a linear regression model, which is trying to predict price based on square footage. Now, the blue dots that we see are the actual values that we have on a data set, and the pink line that we have over here is the predicted values that we have on a data set. So for example, for this dot over here, our line is underestimating the actual value by $10. And over here, we are overestimating by $10. So what the mean absolute value does is pretty much look at the difference between where the line is and where these dots are. And it takes the absolute difference of that across all of the data points, and it creates an average of that. So pretty much what this number is saying is that on average, our prediction is off by this amount of dollars. So the first model off by $51.96, and the second model by $57.54. We are effectively trying to minimize this error to get the best possible outcome at the end of the day. So now that we have created our model and we have two models to compare, and we know that the random forest regressor is the better model, there is one last step that we could do over here, which is hyperparameter tuning. So what is hyperparameter tuning? Well, hyperparameter tuning is one of the processes that we go through to pretty much optimize the results that we're getting from a given model. So take a car, for example. You can't change the engine of your car when your car is running, but you can adjust the air pressure that your engine gets, and you can adjust the amount of fuel that you give your car in order to optimize the performance of your car. And the fuel and the air intake in this scenario are the hyperparameters of a model. The engine itself is the model. So what we're going to do is that we are going to ask our model to test out different combinations of air intake and fuel intake to pretty much figure out what is the best point of air intake and fuel intake in these scenarios, different types of parameters that give us the best output so far. And we're going to measure that output by the amount of the MAE. So we're going to try to minimize that. All right, so we have this piece of code over here that is going to do the hyperparameter tuning for us. And how it's going to do that, it's pretty much by determining the number of estimators that we're going to use. And these are going to be the hyperparameters that we use for our model. So we have either 50 or 100. Then we have a version that is shallow versus full for our depth, and a minimum number of sample split tests between 2 and 5 as well. Now, I remember that when I ran this in the exam, it took quite a lot of time. So I'm going to run this code and come back once it's done. And if you are doing this, if you're following along, just keep this in mind that this will take quite a bit of time. So there we go, our code just ran, and it turns out that the best parameters are a max depth of 10, minimum sample split 2, and number of estimators 100. And this means that our validation MAE was 52.53 and our test MAE was 51.91. So that's actually pretty good results. And if you were following along, now you have built your first machine learning model from scratch without having to code anything. So you can take any of the principles that we looked at in this video to create any machine learning models for yourself. And this is actually a really fun way, at least it was for me, to get started with coding and with coding machine learning models. And I really do hope that I can take the skill set to the next level because I had a lot of fun. So as a quick example, if you wanted to create a machine learning model that predicted the lifetime value of a customer for your business, you could take all of your previous customers and use the information that you have on them. Maybe it's company size, maybe it's the job role, maybe it's if the company is public or not public, maybe it is a revenue estimation of that company, and use all of that information to pretty much predict if a customer will spend a lot with you or not as soon as you onboard them. There are a lot of different directions that you can go with this type of skill set, and honestly, I am really glad that I started learning this right now because I do see how this can be super value additive in the future for myself and for the clients that I work for. But if you feel like this video was a little bit too much and you want to deal with automations in a simpler way, you can go ahead and go to my channel and you'll see that I create a lot of videos about AI automations that don't require any coding whatsoever. You just use very intuitive platforms like Make.com, like Relevance AI, and you still get a really amazing output at the end of the day. And if you want to keep learning about AI and automation, you can go ahead and click on the video that's popping up right over there. And if you want me to build any AI systems for your business so we can take your business to the next level, go ahead and book a call with me in the link down below. And I hope you found this video valuable, and I'll see you in the next time.